Hi, everybody. Welcome to English Digest. I'm Tom.
I'm Stephanie.
And we're going to talk about our feature article today. It's all about Bambi. You may have heard of this deer. I think it's a tiny baby deer or a boy deer or something like that. It's a famous Disney movie. And I haven't seen this movie in its entirety. I've seen it in bits and pieces. But supposedly this movie is famous for Bambi's mother dying during the movie. And that's probably revealing the plot there too much if you haven't seen it. But it's an old movie. I can go ahead and say that.
It's a cartoon. I think it was out even before I was born. But yeah, it was very famous growing up. You know, it was one of the Disney cartoons that most kids would watch. My mom liked Disney movies, so we would watch a lot of Disney. But yeah, the sad part in it is Bambi's mom is shot by a hunter. And it's a really sad part of the movie. Usually with kids' movies, they try not to have anything that's too scary or too upsetting or too sad. But that was the sad part in the Bambi movie.
There are exceptions, of course. The movie The Yearling had a sad ending, and so did Old Yeller.
Old Yeller, yeah.
Indeed, but we're not going to reveal the endings of those movies for you now. But I guess Bambi is similar in that there was something sad that happened in the movie, but actually it was an even scarier story to begin with, and that's what we're going to talk about today. Disney seems to do this a lot. They take old stories and then they change them for marketing purposes, and you don't really see the original story. What was that movie about the mermaid? The Little Mermaid.
Yeah.
That actually isn't very true to the original story. They changed it around to make it a nice movie and stuff like that. And Bambi is no exception, so let's find out what this is all about. Let's read the entire article now from top to bottom. If you've seen Disney's animated movie Bambi, you know it as a sweet, charming story. It depicts a young deer growing up with his friends all around him. However, like many fairy tales adapted into children's movies, Bambi's original story has darker beginnings. In fact, the 1923 novel that preceded the animation is not intended for children. It's a grim warning of the oppression and violence European Jews would experience in the years to come. Felix Salten, a Jewish Austrian writer, penned Bambi, A Life in the Forest, as a metaphor for how Jews in Austria and Germany were treated in his time. He observed the growing fascist ideologies that would later result in the Nazis' rise to power. He also saw how these ideas fanned the flames of anti-Semitism among Europeans. His book casts the animals of the forest as human-like characters that live in constant fear of hunters. They exist under the desperate, haunting feeling that they're alive only to be killed. The characters don't get the happy ending that the Disney movie grants them. Bambi's family members are murdered, including his cousin, who believed the hunters would show mercy if he helped them. In the end, Bambi is left alone, scarred by what he's witnessed. Salten chose to portray his story through the eyes of animals to generate empathy in readers. However, the novel's first English translation changed the story's focus, so it seemed like a simple, conservation-related tale. Walt Disney read this version and based his film on it. Salten's intentions were lost to broader audiences until earlier this year. In January, Princeton University Press published a new translation that's faithful to the original story. I think he foresaw the Holocaust, translator Jack Zipes says of Salten. This novel is an appeal to say, no, this shouldn't happen.
Okay, folks, we're going to be talking about Bambi. Is it a cute animal story or a chilling tale of terror? Well, for me at least, Bambi brings back good memories. Bambi is usually aimed at kids who are, I would say, between 2 and 6 years old. It's for the real small ones. And I thought it was adorable. So to see that it could actually be a chilling tale of terror, woo, I had no idea. But as Tom said, Disney has taken a lot of old books or stories or fairy tales and change them into being a little bit more kid-friendly. Not so dire and not so, I don't know, evil and awful. So let's take a look at this. Where did we get our Bambi story from? Well, if you've seen Disney's animated movie Bambi, you know it as a sweet, charming story. Yeah, it is sweet and charming, except when the mom dies, but that's just a very, very short blip on the screen. If it's animated, usually, if you're talking about a movie at least, it's talking about how it's not real-life people. It's made from drawings. It used to have been made by drawings. Nowadays, our animated films are done on computer by graphic artists, but they're definitely not real people. This is just a cartoon. We called them cartoons when I was growing up. We didn't even say an animated film. We would just say, it's a cartoon playing at the theater. Can we go? So, yeah, if you've seen Disney's version of Bambi, you know it's pretty sweet. It's not anything like A Tale of Terror.
Right. Animated, again, refers to something that is hand-drawn. Sometimes you can use models and you take them one frame at a time. You take pictures of them one frame at a time to animate the movie, to make it look real, even though these things are not there. And, of course, Bambi was hand-drawn. Nowadays, of course, most animated movies are CGI, especially from Pixar. And what's the other one? Dreamscape or whatever? DreamWorks, sorry. And in any case, yes, indeed, the animated movie, we know it as a sweet, charming story, unless you don't count the part where the mother dies. But otherwise, it's kind of sweet. You know, they're nice little deer living in the forest and stuff like that. And it depicts, or it shows, or describes a young deer growing up with his friends all around him. So he's growing up and he's together with all his buddies and his family members, and they're having a great time in the forest.
However, like many fairy tales adapted into children's movies, Bambi's original story has darker beginnings. Darker here means evil, things that are a little bit scary, I think, especially for kids. So, yeah, a lot of the fairy tales are actually pretty dark, I would say. I just did some recordings of fairy tales, and I thought, oh, this is pretty tough.
Pretty gory.
Yeah, this pretty tough story here. Not what I thought it was. They've changed a lot of the fairy tales, so they're much nicer and more suitable for kids. I hope parents out there aren't reading original fairy tales to little small ones. We need to protect our kids, not expose them to the dark, evil world so soon. My goodness. So, in fact, it says, where did this come from? Well, there was a 1923 novel that preceded the animation, and it was not intended for kids at all. So if something precedes something else, it comes before that thing. So 1923 was quite a while ago, but it was not ever a book or a novel that was written for kids. It's a grim warning of the oppression and violence European Jews would experience in the years to come. Now, 1923, of course, precedes the Holocaust, where all of the Jews were killed by the Nazis. So it did happen before that, but it kind of was predicting the future in some ways. If something's grim, guys, it's pretty serious, pretty painful, you know, grim. If someone has a grim expression on their face, it's usually because they're upset or mad about something, or something terrible has happened. So they can have a very grim expression. Well, this was a grim warning of the oppression and violence the Jews would face in just about a decade later.
Yeah, we of course know the Nazis came to power during the 1930s, so this is a little early, but still, I guess the seeds of anti anti-Semitism had been sown right after World War I there. So again, this particular animated movie the novel preceded the animation, the animated movie, and the book was not intended for children. Again, it's a grim warning of the oppression and violence that European Jews would experience in the years to come. So oppression just means people are being oppressed, they're being exploited, they're being harmed, they're being rounded up and killed and tortured and stuff like that. We've got examples of oppression all over the world. The oppression of black people, for example, in the United States as slaves, and there are countless other examples.
Now, Felix Salten was the Jewish-Austrian writer who actually wrote the book Bambi, A Life in the Forest. So it says here we're using the word penned to replace write. So if you're a writer, you can also have a pen name. Some people don't like to use their real names when they're writing novels or nonfiction books even. So they'll have a pen name. So this was the person who actually wrote that grim, sort of chilling tale long ago, Felix Salten. It's described here as being a metaphor for how Jews in Austria and Germany were treated in his time. So he is a Jew himself. He lived in Austria, so he's Austrian. If you talk about a metaphor, we often use this when we're talking about literature, guys. It's just, it could be a figure of speech, could be a word or a phrase, and it's applied to an object or an action, but it's not literal, it's figurative. For example, this is an example in my book. It just says, I fell through a trapdoor of grief. Well, a trapdoor really isn't made out of grief, but it's a way to talk about how it just makes your whole life just fall, right? So a metaphor, it just can be a representative or symbolic of something else that you're trying to express. And so this is what he did. He wrote a book that was a metaphor for how he felt Jews were being treated.
Indeed, I can think of another example. My mind is a waterfall of creative ideas.
Excellent.
My brain is not actually a waterfall, but I've got lots of ideas falling into the water like a volcano. I'm sorry, like a waterfall, not a volcano. But in any case, here we've reached about the midway point in our article for today, so let's take a break and stay tuned. We'll be right back after we hear from our Chinese teacher.
听众朋友大家好，相信大家都有听过小鹿斑比这个故事。不过小鹿斑比我们大概通常都是从迪士尼的动画电影这边得知啦。那我们这篇文章就是要谈谈小鹿斑比它的原著。那这一篇是设计成为克漏字，也就是综合测验。我们刚刚说这个小鹿斑比基本上大家都是从迪士尼的动画电影来得知，但是其实呢，它像很多的改编的这个童话故事一样，本来的原著是比较阴暗的内容哦。在第3句的地方，虽然是综合测验的第1题，当然4个选项都给你了，看起来像是过去式，但是也可以当成过去完成 PP 再加介系词的片语。可是回过头来我们看这一句，其实它是关系子句的简化哦。先行词是 fairy tales， 关系子句从第1格这个地方一直到 movies 逗点这里，那么其实它省略的是 that 或者是 which 跟后面的 are be 动词，因为就像很多什么样的 fairy tales 一样，被改编的 fairy tales 一样，所以它是关系子句 which that 省略。好，然后呢 be 动词变成 be-ing， 直接剩下 PP， 答案选出 adapted into 被改编成儿童电影这样子的一个故事。西元1923年他就已经这个出版这个小说，他其实当时不是给儿童的，他主要是针对欧洲犹太人在接下来几年可能会遭到压迫跟暴力的一种警告。在第1段的第4句我们也看到了2个关系子句，第一个关系子句先出现在前面，先行词是 the 1923 novel。 好，那么接下来后面的 that 一直到animation， 这里可以左右括号起来是关系子句，限定用法的哦，限定1923年当时写的小说。 好，那么接下来我们看到的是第5句。第5句这里呢，也有一个关系子句的简化。第5句的先行词是 the oppression and violence， 也就是压迫还有暴力。后面的关系子句从 European Jews would experience in the years to come， 这个地方可以左右括号起来。那么在这里看起来好像没有动词 ing 耶，其实它是关系词的简化。关系词把它省略掉是什么感觉呢？ European 其实前面本来应该有 which 或者是 that 这个关代代替前面的先行词 the oppression and violence， 但是为什么关系词可以省略呢？主要是因为关系词在括号这个关系子句当中当受词，当哪个字的受词在这里是中间动作 experience 的受词，经历体验什么东西呢？体验的就是这些，经历的就是这些暴力跟压迫。所以如果说关代它本身当成括号关系子句的受词来使用，就可以省略掉。
We're going to take a quick break. Stay tuned. We'll be right back.
Okay, so let's continue to talk about Bambi. Again, you may have seen the movie, the Disney animated movie. And it's a cute, charming story. Of course, the part where the mother deer dies is not nice, but otherwise it's a cute little colorful movie that kids like to watch. And the original story, though, predated or preceded the movie, and it was a lot darker. It was actually a grim warning of the oppression and the violence that the Jews in Europe would experience later on in the 30s and the 40s during World War II at the concentration camps. You know the story. So again, we've got the Jewish Austrian writer, and he used these deer in the story as a metaphor for how Jews in Austria and Germany were treated in his time. So again, he used the deers to represent people, or the deer, I guess deer or deers are both correct for the plural form of deer. One deer, two deer, or two deers, you could say that as well. And this, I should mention this as a side, this reminds me of the graphic novel Maus, M-A-U-S, which also has the same idea, a metaphor for World War II, how the Jews were treated in the book. The Jews are mice. The Germans are, what is it? They are cats, who, of course, chase after mice. And the Americans were dogs, and the French were frogs, etc., etc. So, yeah, that's similar. It was a metaphor for those various groups of people.
Yeah, he observed the growing fascist ideologies that would later result in the Nazis' rise to power. Fascist is the adjective form of fascism, a very authoritarian sort of ruling and kind of control over people. We're seeing that all around the world, though, where governments are turning more and more into fascist rulers, taking away freedom from people. So he observed that there were these fascist ideologies or ways of believing. Systems of belief would be ideologies that would later result in the Nazis' rise to power. If you can get people brainwashed into thinking a particular group of people is evil, it's very easy to control them after that. We're seeing that even today. You would think we'd never had history before, Tom. I feel like nobody out there is paying attention. We're turning into the same sort of folks that were in existence around World War II. So, yeah, he observed that this was happening. He wanted to warn people, and that's why he penned Bambi.
Okay, and of course he also saw how these ideas fanned the flames of anti-Semitism among Europeans. Anti-Semitism just refers to people's disliking of Jewish people, and of course that was quite common during World War II, especially in Germany there.
Oh, it still is.
Absolutely, and his book casts the animals of the forest as human-like characters that live in constant fear of hunters. Maybe the hunters were the Nazis and the deer were the Jews. Again, similar to the graphic novel Mouse, which is another subject we should talk about some other day. But again, they exist under the desperate, haunting feeling that they're alive only to be killed. That's how the deer feel. They've got this haunting feeling. If something's haunting, it just scares you. It's something that you often think about. It's in your mind. It may not be happening right away, but you're really afraid that this might happen, so you're haunted by the possibility that you will be killed. And that's how the deer felt in this book.
Yeah. You can hear a haunting melody, a haunting tune, a haunting piece of music that just really stays in your memory and it comes back to you a lot. And it has sort of a sad feeling to it. So they exist under the desperate, haunting feeling that they're only alive because they need to be killed and eaten, perhaps, by these other people. The characters don't get the happy ending that the Disney movie grants them. Oh, anything but. Bambi's family members are murdered, including his cousin, who believed the hunters would show mercy if he helped them. Yeah, there were some Jews during World War II that thought, well, if I help these Nazis, they're surely going to let me live. They're not going to kill me. They turned around and killed those people who helped the Nazis too. It didn't matter. You were a Jew, and so you're all bad. So yeah, don't ever help the bad guys thinking they're going to spare your lives. That doesn't happen. So in the end, Bambi is left alone, scarred by what he's witnessed. Now, usually if we get a wound, especially on our skin, if, we get a big cut, or maybe we fall down and scrape our knee, there's sometimes after our skin heals, there will be a mark left over. That's a scar. But if you're scarred by something, and we're using it in a figurative way here, it means something bad happened to you, and you never really were able to completely forget it or overcome it. It stays in your memory, and it affects your future and how you make your choices and live your life.
Right, if you're a child and you see your parents fighting or something like that, and one of them hits the other one or something, you could be scarred for life or whatever. And Bambi is all by himself at the end of this novel, and he's scarred by what he's witnessed, and he'll never be the same. To witness just means to see something, especially if it's a crime or something bad. Now, here in the last paragraph, it says, Salton chose to portray his story through the eyes of animals to generates empathy in readers. So here we've got the verb to portray, which means that's how you present a story. It's how you depict something. So he told his story basically using animals and their perception on things. And in doing so, people might feel sorry for the animals. Oh, they're just harmless little deer frolicking through the forest, hopping happily through the forest there. So you might have empathy for them. Empathy is similar to sympathy. Empathy, of course, means you understand and you share the feelings of another person. Sympathy is similar, but that's usually used, I guess, when people die. You have sympathy for somebody because maybe their father died or their grandfather or grandmother or whatever. You send them a sympathy card. But here, they want to have empathy for the animals and, by extension, people.
Yeah, if you have empathy, you understand somebody else's feelings because you've had them yourself. And it's a much stronger, deeper feeling than just sympathy. So it says here in the novel's first English translation, they changed the story's focus. So it seemed like a simple conservation-related tale. Conservation we hear about a lot these days. If you're into conservation, you're into preserving and protecting the natural environment in particular, especially wildlife and vegetation. So he got that version, Walt Disney did. He read that version and based his film on it instead of the original book where the focus was much different and much darker, you could say. Salton's intentions, his motives, were lost to broader audiences until earlier this year. A lot of people that are doing research in school, maybe they're a professor or they're getting their graduate degrees, they go back and they do research papers on things, and this is something that came up, and now more of today's audience out there understand that the Bambi book was much different in its original version.
Right, and of course, this is Disney, so of course they wanted to make a happy movie, but it makes it sound like Walt Disney was not aware of the original story because he based his story on a soft translation. And again, we've got a new translation that came out earlier this year. In January, Princeton University Press published a new translation that's faithful to the original story. Basically, it's a direct translation. The new translation does not try to change the story to make it softer. And here's what the translator himself said. I think he foresaw the Holocaust. Again, that's what translator Jack Zipes says of the original author, Sultan. The Holocaust, of course, refers to the period of time when the Jews were massacred in Germany, 6 million of them. So that generally refers to only the Jews that died during that conflict. Of course, lots of other people died along with them, but most of the folks that were exterminated were Jewish.
So this novel, he says, is an appeal to say, no, this shouldn't happen again. But of course, history is bound to repeat itself because people don't study history or our history books. And I know this for sure have been changed. And so our kids today are not hearing some of the real stories that happened. So people need to really go back and read about history so that they can make better choices in the future and not repeat the mistakes people have made over the centuries. Right now, we're going to listen one more time to our Chinese teacher.
当时这本小说的作者是 Philip Sultan， 那么他因为观察到日益蓬勃发展的这个法西斯主义，那后来就导致纳粹分子的上台执政咯，所以接下来他才写了这本书。我们看一下第二段，在第二句的地方有一个限定用法的关系子句，先行词是 The growing fascist ideologies， 后面从 that 到句尾可以左右括号起来，限定用法的关系子句，修饰前面这个所谓的法西斯主义。好，那么之后呢，他就描述了用这个小说的方式啊，把森林里的动物塑造成类似像人类的角色，然后呢，描述他们对于被猎人要猎杀的这种恐惧。在第四句当中，同样也有出现限定用法的关系子句，先行词是 human-like characters， 后面的 that到句尾可以把它括号起来 ，that 就是一个冠带。好，那么到像这样子的一个在内容之下呢，主要就是讲这些动物的生存很绝望，他们没有办法摆脱这种恐惧，而且觉得活着好像就是被猎杀一般。所以接下来呢，后来在迪士尼电影当中呢，他们就用了这样子的一个故事做了一些改编。当然原著的话呢是没有这样子的快乐结局了，所以接下来第六句 The happy ending 这里可以画起来是先行词，后面 that 到句尾是限定用法的关系子句。同样第七句也有看到关系子句哦，不过是非限定用法补充说明的。那么先行词是 his cousin， 逗点之后的 who 到句尾可以左右括号起来。不过最后面这个第四题啊，我们还是要来看一下第四题的4个选项里面 A to do something 通常表示目的， B 跟 D by doing something 或者是 through doing something 通常表示方法， C 的 generated 感觉上是个过去分词或者是简单过去式。所以第四题在这里我们看到句子当中是作者用这样子的一个动物的观点来描述故事，目的是为了要引起读者的这种同理之心，在文意上是表达目的，所以第四题答案应该要选 A。 那么当然我们说这一整篇文章的关系子句很多，最后一个关系子句就出现在第二段第5句的地方。第5句就是所谓的先行词 a new translation 新的译本。什么样新的译本呢？that 到句尾可以左右括号，它是限定用法的关系子句，也就是忠于原著的一个新译本。以上是我们今天的内容，我们下次见，拜拜。
That's it for today, everybody. Thanks for joining us. And hey, maybe you have a new perspective on Bambi. And you could probably watch it on some kind of streaming platform online. From all of us here at English Digest, my name is Tom.
I'm Stephanie.
Goodbye.
Bye.